Welcome back to the deep dive. We're all about getting straight to the core of, well, sometimes universe-shifting ideas.
That's the goal.
And today, we're tackling something pretty fundamental. We're really challenging that core Western idea, the fixed, separate, autonomous self.
We're plunging headfirst into dependent origination.
Or pradityasamutpada.
That's the Sanskrit, yes. And it's a principle that, honestly, it can feel quite jarring because it pushes back hard against our cultural stories. You know, the whole fierce individuality, pull yourself up by your bootstraps narrative.
Free will, even.
Free will, personal responsibility. It challenges how we think about all of that. It can be genuinely disorienting for people.
Okay, so let's state the core thesis right up front. Dependent origination basically says everything arises because of a whole network of causes and conditions. Nothing just is on its own.
Precisely. Everything is interconnected, interwoven. And if that's true, well, then the idea of some central CEO, a fixed independent you calling all the shots, that starts to look like maybe a profound illusion.
An illusion.
Okay, exactly. So our mission today is, first, to unpack this ancient Buddhist insight. But then, crucially, hold it up against what modern psychology and sociology are telling us.
And see if they line up.
And see how they line up. Because the spoiler is the evidence from ancient philosophy to modern data seems to point in the same direction, that separates self. It's maybe more of a useful fiction than a hard reality, an illusion of separation the mind creates.
All right, let's dive in. Part one then, defining this. Dependent reality and the conditioned self.
Okay.
So, stripping away maybe the more spiritual layer for a moment, how do we define dependent origination in simple terms? What's the basic mechanism?
At its heart, it's just a principle about how reality works. It says that all phenomena, and that means everything, physical objects, thoughts, emotions, events, they only arise because of multiple interacting factors or conditions.
Nothing has its own independent essence.
Nothing exists in isolation, no. Everything is contingent. You change the conditions. The thing itself changes or disappears. There's no inherent standalone existence.
And the Buddha famously taught this using the 12 links, right? Which often sounds incredibly complex, but it's mainly about showing how suffering or just experience keeps going, isn't it? Like a chain reaction.
Yeah, it illustrates the conditioned loop of reality, or often how suffering perpetuates itself. It's often presented as a chain, but crucially one without a definite starting point.
No first calls.
Right. So very briefly, ignorance, like a misunderstanding of reality, gives rise to mental formations or impulses. These shape consciousness. Consciousness then influences how we perceive, name, and form our conceptual world. This leads to the senses operating, then contact, feeling, craving, clinging,
Easy's going.
becoming, which leads to birth, and inevitably aging and death. It's a cycle showing how the conditioned world sort of locks itself into patterns.
Okay, that's still a bit abstract. Let's make it super concrete. You mentioned interdependence earlier, like the air I'm breathing right now.
Perfect example. Your ability to breathe depends entirely on vast, complex systems. Plants producing oxygen, atmospheric pressure, global climate patterns.
Yeah.
None of which you personally control, right?
Not at all. Or think about something really simple, like my morning coffee. Why coffee? Why not tea?
Exactly. That preference isn't some purely free choice made in a void. It's a result of a whole network of prior causes.
Right.
Well, maybe your parents drank coffee. Maybe it's just what's readily available and marketed in your culture. Maybe your work schedule kind of pushes you towards caffeine. Or maybe it's just a physical habit you picked up years ago. If you had different genetics, maybe caffeine makes you jittery. Or if you were born somewhere where tea is the absolute norm, the result, your morning drink, would likely be different. The conditions shape the outcome.
So applying that same logic universally, the self, the me, isn't some separate thing either. It's more like an emergent pattern.
That's a great way to put it. An emergent pattern. It arises from this temporary coming together of genetics, your upbringing, your culture, education, all your experiences, everything.
Like the wave and ocean analogy.
Yeah.
A wave looks distinct for a moment, but it's just the ocean moving in a particular way.
Precisely. The self is like a convenient label we put on this shifting pattern. But here's where it gets really sticky, philosophically speaking. The illusion of the doer. We feel like we choose.
Right. That's the common sense experience, isn't it? I decided to say that. I chose to get up. I mean, if I decide right now to stand up and I do it, where's the illusion in that? It feels like I did it.
Okay, the illusion isn't that the action didn't happen. It's in the interpretation afterwards. Actions unfold, thoughts appear, decisions happen moment by moment, sure, but they happen based on that whole confluence of conditions we talked about.
Okay.
Then the mind almost instantly creates a story about it. It inserts this idea of a consistent, fixed I who is sitting behind the scenes, independently authoring that action, that owner of the action, that permanent controller. That's the potential fiction.
So the action of standing up wasn't a first cause decision from some unconditioned me.
It was a conditioned response, a response to maybe a thought, a physical need, an external cue, your habits, all arising from prior conditions, not an uncaused choice from a separate entity.
So my genetics, my environment, what I ate for breakfast,
No.
they're just as much the doer as the me I think I am.
They are the conditions through which the action arises. The action couldn't happen without them.
Wow. Okay. That sets the stage nicely for part 2 then. Modern science. Because this is where it gets really fascinating, right? This ancient idea finding echoes in modern labs.
Absolutely. This isn't just philosophy anymore. Modern psychology and sociology are providing, pretty rigorous data that seems to support this view of interdependence.
How so? Psychology first.
Well, take the whole nature versus nurture debate. It's basically obsolete now. Researchers understand that behavior isn't just genes or environment, it's this incredibly complex, dynamic interaction between them.
Nothing acts alone.
Nothing acts alone. A classic example they use is something like anxiety. A person might have a genetic predisposition, right? A vulnerability.
Okay.
But that genetic vulnerability might only actually express itself. It might only arise as anxiety if that person finds themselves in a really high stress, maybe unsupportive environment. The gene needs the right environmental conditions to switch on, so to speak.
So the gene isn't destiny on its own. It depends.
It depends. It proves that nothing, not even something inherited like a gene, emerges in isolation. Behavior is always the outcome of that intricate dance between internal and external factors.
All right, now let's get to that sociological insight you mentioned earlier, the one you said should really shift our perspective on success and failure.
Yes, this one is, well, it's quite powerful. Research, especially in fields like public health and economic mobility, has found something pretty stunning.
Which is?
We need to slow down here because it's quite a claim. The data strongly suggests that the ZIP code you are born into predicts your future financial and health outcomes more reliably than almost any other single factor.
Wait, more reliably than IQ? Or how hard you work, ambition?
More reliably than most individual traits, yes. It's a staggering finding when you really let it sink in.
It really challenges the American dream narrative, doesn't it? The whole rags to riches story. Because people do sometimes overcome incredible odds. What about those outliers? Don't they prove individual agency can override conditioning?
That's a really important question, and those stories are often inspirational, no doubt, but statistically, they are outliers. Their rarity kind of highlights how difficult it is to overcome those initial conditions rather than disproving the general rule.
Mm-hmm.
And even when you look closely at those outlier stories, you almost always find they didn't achieve success in a vacuum. There were usually specific, perhaps uncommon conditions that helped them. Maybe an exceptional teacher who saw potential.
Or a mentor, a specific program.
Exactly. A supportive relative, a scholarship, a lucky break, a government program, factors that weren't available to everyone else in that same difficult starting position. Their bootstraps were still tied to some supportive conditions, even if rare ones.
So even what looks like pure individual agency overcoming circumstance is itself often the result of a fortunate, maybe unusual set of conditions coming together.
It seems that way, yes. Agency itself isn't this totally independent force floating free from the world. It's also something that arises dependent on conditions like having the health, education, and opportunity to even conceive of certain goals, let alone pursue them.
Okay, so let's tie this together. This ancient idea, dependent origination, seems to resonate strongly with what, 3 specific areas of modern science?
Yeah, you could map it pretty closely. First, systems theory, which looks at the world not as collections of separate things, but as complex systems where everything affects everything else, like an ecosystem. Change one part, the whole system responds.
Makes sense. Second,
Epigenetics, which, as we touched on, shows how environmental factors literally switch genes on or off. It's a direct biological mechanism showing how the outside shapes the inside.
okay. Then third.
And third, the whole field of social determinants of health. This body of research conclusively shows that your health isn't just about your personal choices, diet, exercise, whatever. It's heavily shaped, conditioned by your income level, your education, the safety of your neighborhood, your access to healthcare, your social support networks.
Things often outside your immediate control.
Often way outside. These social conditions often have a much bigger impact on health outcomes than individual willpower alone.
Right. This brings us to part 3, though. Because if everything is so conditioned by my genes, my zip code, my experiences, it starts to sound a bit like destiny. Like it's all predetermined.
Yeah.
Where does freedom fit in? Isn't this just fatalism?
Ugh, the million-dollar question. And it's a paradox, really. If you believe everything is rigidly determined and you cling to the idea of a separate self who should be in control, well, that's a recipe for suffering. You're constantly fighting reality, trying to manage the unmanageable.
So freedom isn't about breaking free from conditions.
The insight of dependent origination suggests liberation comes not from somehow controlling all the conditions, which is impossible, as we've seen, but from seeing through the illusion of the separate self that feels it needs to be in control.
So freedom is more about recognizing how things actually work.
Yeah.
Seeing the conditioning clearly.
Exactly. It's about understanding that actions, thoughts, and outcomes unfold based on the causes and conditions present. When you deeply see that there isn't a fixed, independent manager running the show, the enormous burden of trying to be that manager, it just drops away.
That sounds like relief.
It can be a profound relief, yes. An ease. You stop fighting the current of reality and instead participate in it, fully aware of its conditioned nature.
And this shift in perspective, it must have huge implications for how we view other people, especially when things go wrong or when we disagree. Blame, for instance.
Oh, absolutely. Blame changes fundamentally. If actions arise from a network of conditions, where do you logically place blame? You start pointing to a single, isolated, faulty self as the sole cause.
You look broader.
You start seeing the web of influences that led to that action, whether it's harmful or just different from your own. Now, this doesn't mean excusing harmful behavior or pretending consequences don't matter.
Right. It's not letting people off the hook entirely.
Not necessarily letting off the hook in terms of consequences or accountability for actions, but it shifts the focus. Instead of just condemning the person, it invites understanding the causes that led to the action. It moves from moral judgment of a bad person to analyzing the conditions that produced the bad outcome.
Let's make that concrete again.
Yeah.
Political disagreements, they get so heated, so personal, it's easy to see the other side as just wrong, morally deficient even.
Right. But apply the lens of dependent origination. That person's strongly held view didn't just appear out of nowhere. It's conditioned by their upbringing, maybe their family's economic situation, the news sources they trust, the community they live in, their sense of security or insecurity.
So their view is a reflection of their condition, just like mine is a reflection of mine.
Exactly. The difference isn't necessarily a sign of one person being good and the other bad, but a sign of them being shaped by different sets of circumstances.
Okay, or a tougher example.
Oh.
Homelessness.
Yeah.
Our society often defaults to blaming the individual laziness, poor choices, addiction.
Yes, the simplistic view. But the data, the research on social determinants we mentioned, it overwhelmingly shows that homelessness is most often the result of complex systemic conditions.
Right.
Lack of affordable housing is huge, history of trauma, untreated mental illness or addiction, often stemming from that trauma or lack of support, job loss in a precarious economy, institutional failures. When you see the action or the state of being as a product of these difficult conditions, condemnation starts to feel misplaced.
It shifts towards thinking about solutions differently.
It shifts towards diagnosing the system. If we want fewer people experiencing homelessness, simply blaming individuals won't fix it. We need to change the conditions, provide housing, mental health care support systems, address the causes, not just punish the outcome.
So accountability remains, but it's reframed. It's less about finding fault in a person and more about understanding and addressing the causes of harm.
Precisely. And what arises naturally from that understanding, almost inevitably, is compassion.
Why inevitably?
Because if you truly see that there's no inherently separate other person over there who is solely responsible for their suffering or their actions, if you see everyone, including yourself, as part of this vast web of interconnected causes and effects, then judgment softens. There's less us versus them. There's just life unfolding through all these interdependent patterns. Compassion becomes the logical response to seeing reality that way.
Okay, let's quickly summarize the shift in perspective we've discussed.
Right.
The sort of normal cultural view versus the dependent origination view. On success.
Normal view. It's all down to individual hard work, talent, grit. Dependent origination view. Success arises from a confluence of factors: family support, access to good education, economic opportunity, health, safety, maybe some luck.
Health.
Normal view. Purely personal choices, diet, exercise, willpower. Dependent origination view, primarily shaped by genetics, access to quality healthcare, socioeconomic status, environmental factors, stress levels.
And the big one, identity.
Normal view. There's a solid, core, independent self inside, making choices, driving the bus. Dependent origination view. Identity is a fluid, ever-changing pattern, constantly being shaped and reshaped by internal and external conditions. Not a fixed thing, but a process.
So the big takeaway for you listening, the research really does seem to back this up. Our circumstances are conditions. They shape our lives far more profoundly than we usually like to admit. That feeling of being a totally independent agent, maybe it's not the whole story.
It seems we're more like interdependent nodes in a massive, intricate web than solitary actors writing our own scripts from scratch.
And the sources we looked at suggest that really grasping this, recognizing dependent origination, isn't just an intellectual exercise. It's seen as a gateway, a way into non-duality where that perceived boundary between self and world starts to dissolve.
Yeah.
So we want to leave you with a question to maybe mull over, a provocative thought. If your body absolutely depends on the air, the water, the food around you, and your thoughts depend entirely on the language, the culture, the ideas you've absorbed, what boundary are you actually defending? What conceptual line do you have to keep drawing moment to moment to maintain that feeling of being a truly separate, independent you?
And what might happen, what might it feel like if you just let that boundary soften, even just for a little while?
Just consider the sheer interconnectedness of your own existence today.
Some food for thought there.
Definitely. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the conditioned nature of reality and the illusion of the separate self.